Welcome to Industry Conversations. I'm Rob Gatroy from Armoured Consulting, and today it's with pleasure that I'm joined by Julie Cabus, Managing Director of Enterprise Security Risk Management at Kroll, a leading global risk and financial advisory firm. Julie spent more than 20 years as a Foreign Service Special Agent with the US Department of State's Diplomatic Security Service, holding a number of leadership and security management positions around the world. Her career has taken her to postings in Afghanistan, Algeria, Pakistan, Niger, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Canberra, Australia. And that's where I first met her in 2010. We later connected in Kabul, Afghanistan, where she served as the Regional Security Officer for the US Embassy. She also led the State Department's Defense Equipment and Armored Vehicle Program in Washington, managing fleets both in the US and at diplomatic missions worldwide. In this conversation, Julie and I talk about her career and her perspective on civilian armoured vehicles, from the balance between comfort and protection to the importance of training, procurement and supply chains. She reflects on lessons learned, highlights the value of data analysis, and stresses the need to keep vehicles operational in the toughest environments. Above all, she shares her passion for ensuring that armoured vehicles remain a vital tool for safety in high-risk areas and for driving innovation in this critical field. I truly enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that you will too. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can catch up on all our latest conversations. Welcome to Industry Conversations.
Rob, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for our 15 years of friendship and collaboration in this realm. It's been great seeing your success as you advance the civilian armored vehicle continuum, the need that we have for this type of conversation and type of industry advocacy. So it's great to see you.
Excellent. It's lovely to see you. And again, we've known each other 15 odd years or so. I think we first met in Canberra in the American Embassy or the RSO there, Regional Security Officer, a beautiful red brick building of Americana architecture and very much a highlight of Canberra architecture, which is extraordinarily very different because it's a very young city in that way. So yes. I know we met there originally and then in Washington once or twice, I think it was, at least dealing with the armoured vehicles and the work we were doing with the FCDO, and also in Kabul, meeting at the embassy there, looking through issues of through-life support for the civilian armoured vehicles there, which is something that we're going to cover today. So that's a good lead-in. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, the work that you've done at Department of State, which has been exemplary and extraordinary, the journey you've had, and we'd love to hear a bit about it. And also the work that you're now doing at Kroll in ESRM.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. 26 years ago, I joined the Department of State as a diplomatic security special agent, which is the law enforcement and security arm for the U.S. Department of State. So I spent, the past 2.5 decades as a federal law enforcement officer. Mm-hmm. Over the course of time, as you alluded to, I've had a number of overseas assignments everywhere from Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Niamey, Niger, Peshawar, Pakistan, Algeria, my 3 wonderful years in Canberra, and additionally after that, Kabul and Baghdad, Iraq.
Wow, amazing.
One thing consistent through all of those assignments was the use of armored vehicles. And so that common thread will carry through our conversation today. Additionally, when not serving overseas, I was assigned domestically in Washington, D.C. And one of the highlights of my career was overseeing the armored vehicle program for the U.S. Department of State, which arguably has the largest armored vehicle fleet of any federal agency. And we support, of course, all the foreign affairs organizations that are serving overseas as well. So it's been a varied career. I've spent a lot of time doing executive protection work as well, large contract management, and really enjoying all of it, but also, as noted, seeing common themes and recognizing that the need for superior, high-quality equipment, especially armored vehicles, prevailed throughout much of my career. Most recently, though, I decided to retire, and I've left the federal government, and I now work for a security and financial advisory risk group called Kroll. Within Kroll, there is the Enterprise Security Risk Management Group, where we take on similar challenges to what I did in the federal government, but we do that for the private sector. So corporations, high net individuals, and we spend a lot of time looking at security and risk management. Obviously, there's a component of cyber risk, investigations and disputes, security program evaluation, large-scale event planning, law enforcement consulting, crisis communications, crisis response, just to name a few. So the transition from the public sector to the private sector has been engaging, interesting, and I'm really grateful for the experiences that I've been able to bring forward into the environment at Kroll. And to be candid, we talk about armored vehicles, much like I did back when I was working for the government, and utilizing them in a way as a tool to assist in mitigating risk for our clients and looking at ways that armored vehicles could be utilized if necessary or when necessary. So everything is full circle, right? Once you start in it, you never really get out of it. And I'm grateful for the experience I had and the opportunity to work with folks like you to continue my education over the last 15 years in the field of armored vehicles.
Excellent. And look, it's interesting. You made the jump from the public sector, as we would call it in Australia, to the private sector. My experience was jumping from the private to the public and now then back into private again. And I think there's an interesting journey of culture, if you like. And some of the things I remember when I started with Defence Materiel, the Department of Defence, quite a few years back, and I was brought in, interestingly, in that they wanted private sector experience and business acumen to be brought into the program management for defence procurement and project management. And I did, and sometimes with a degree of conflict with my Brigadier General, but that's how it works. But interestingly, then what I learned and how I then embrace a program management and a structural element and a structured methodology that you don't sometimes have in the private sector. And then having learned that and mastered it, and now bringing it back into the private sector to say with our clients, look, there needs to be more structure and there's a process. And if you follow that process, say from capability definition, technical specifications, technical evaluation of a procurement tender, and then through life support, it can't be, if you like, willy-nilly to that extent.
Yeah.
So I think we share a common experience, and I think that experience of jumping in and out between private and public is beneficial for both parties. And so that leads me, and maybe you can tell us a little bit of sort of some of your day-to-day activities when you were managing the program at DAV, the Armoured Vehicle Program, sort of that program management, that daily activity, that both the strategic and operational aspect that you did, and what you saw were some of the big challenges in relation to managing what is, I think, pretty much the largest armoured vehicle fleet that there is in the world.
I'll tell you, I think it came down to a number of different factors. You talked about process. I call it the 3 Ps: policy, process, and procedure. What's the policy that drives the use of armored vehicles, as an example? What's the process by which we do everything from develop to procure to field the vehicles? And then what's the procedure by which we maintain, continue to improve, all those different things? And so, this goes, my time running the Defensive Equipment and Armored Vehicle Program for the State Department was really, I think, almost at the peak of our usage and our need. And so for me, it was day to day was about, hey, what are we doing and why are we doing it? Are we meeting the need? is that feedback loop complete, where we put something into the field, we get feedback, and can we correct and make changes as necessary to keep improving? And remember, this is 2011, 12, 13 timeframe. And we were exploring, the State Department was exploring, how do we expand, for example, various vendors, not only suppliers, Toyota, BMW, General Motors, but the third-party providers of the aftermarket armoring that we were predominantly relying upon at that time. So every day was a little bit different, but it was about making sure that what we were doing and why we were doing it mattered. And it was working with vendors, it was working with auto manufacturers, it was working within the department to ensure that we were providing the best and most fulsome a level of protection for the occupants of the vehicles, working through issues with training for drivers, working through issues with the vendors on things that we thought we could do but that we couldn't do and have to do modifications. Quality assurance, quality control, right? I mean, for me, that was always the most important thing, which is, will this car perform the way we engineered it to? Is it going to keep people alive? Especially when we had active embassies in war zones. You had Afghanistan, you had Iraq, you had a number of continental conflicts across Africa. These cars were just a day-to-day disposition with respect to keeping Americans safe. And from time to time, Australian prime ministers and foreign ministers, when they would go places where there was no Australian embassy. So we were really sort of forward leaning into all this. This BMW was bringing the X5 production to the United States. They had the 7 Series in Germany. We were looking at different platforms beyond, General Motors and the Land Cruiser. So it was busy, but it was exciting because you knew that while the strategic policy was saying, hey, we have to produce, we have to come up with ways to keep people safe, the tactical and operational was, how do we do that? And so it was a mix of both. And again, in looking back over the last 26 years of my life, I would say that time in defensive equipment and armored vehicles ranks among one of my most cherished tours within the Department of State. It's just amazing when you can see something that starts as a concept, right? And the concept is to build an armored vehicle. And you build the vehicle, and then you say, hey, we need to take this one step further. Communications, for example. What do we put in for communications in that vehicle to keep it safer? And you take that concept and you walk it all the way through to the end, and you see people riding in that vehicle in a place like, you name it, Afghanistan, as I did every day when I was there. And you go, all right, we're onto something here. These vehicles are doing what we envisioned them to do and more. And for that, I mean, incredibly grateful for the opportunity to have managed that program.
I think it's interesting because you're right. It's it's policy, it's programming, and it's procurement, and the operational side. There's always this challenge between the strategic overview and then the practical reality.
Yes.
And certainly dealing with the diplomats, who are a very unique brand and
Yes,
group of people,
we
to
are.
say the least. Yes, we won't. No, we will be very diplomatic in how we describe the diplomats. And we had one particular gentleman who's a very nice chap, there's no doubt. And he was just very, very unhappy about his vehicle. It happened to be a BMW, a 7 Series, as it happens. And we spent an inordinate amount of time trying to fix problems with a vehicle that this one was just a lemon. At the end of the day, we kept putting time and money and effort into it. We couldn't actually fix it in the end. We replaced it at the end. But there is, and we'll talk about a bit later on, that balance between comfort, security, protection,
Yes.
discretion. You can
Yes.
drive around in a tank, and that's terrific, but everyone knows it's a tank. And in many cases, that's not what diplomats want. They want the comfort. You say, well, in order to have that comfort, I have a constraint of mobility. We need to balance that. And how are you able to sort of balance that um, again between comfort, between mobility characteristics, safety, security,
Yeah.
and in many cases, you had operational people who were then, with guns, with
Yes.
rifles, were a protection group, if you like. We didn't have so much of that in Australia. We did obviously in Afghanistan and Iraq. And that presented us with some challenges in how we created the fleet. So what were some of the challenges in trying to balance all of those together, do you think?
Well, it's interesting. I'm 5'3", so I could put on protective equipment, helmet, and easily slip in and out of these vehicles. Any
Right.
one of my colleagues that was nearing 6 feet tall or, wider shoulders or what have you, it
Yeah.
was a struggle. I mean, I felt for those folks. And these were the full-size Land Cruisers and Suburbans, let alone the smaller, boxier Land Cruiser or even a sedan. So there was always that that balance between the space you lose to accommodate the armoring
Mhm.
versus the operational wherewithal to get people in and out of the car. And at the end of the day, most armored vehicles, even large SUVs, end up being about a four-person vehicle, four-passenger vehicle, and it's tight.
Yes.
But juxtapose that to, at the time, in the, sort of 2012, 2013, 2014, the conversations that were happening after the bottom fell out of the U.S. auto industry about the greening of fleets and downsizing of fleets and getting rid of big vehicles. I mean, Ford largely just got rid of all sedans, right? And so one of our major armored platforms was the Crown Victoria, that
Right.
old iconic U.S. police car. And so we were struggling in the department at that time to figure out, like, what can we do to broaden the types of vehicles that we have that still accommodate every passenger, from someone like me at 5'3" to somebody who's 6 feet
6
tall.
foot 3. Yeah.
It's very difficult. It was never something that that was never a problem. There was a problem I was never really able to solve in its entirety. Of course, over time, you get more proficient and efficient with the interiors of vehicles, trying to create, a couple inches of space here and there.
Yeah.
But you never really garnered that much space to accommodate that sort of overly large person or get beyond perhaps 4 passengers comfortably. And that was just the reality.
We
Operationally, how that translated was, okay, now motorcades are going to be bigger. If you're moving with 4 or 5 or 6 people, you've gone up now from one car, maybe a lead, a limo, and a follow, to 4 or 5 cars. And
that has
does
its
that
own
make sense?
security risk and its own
Yes,
operational challenges, let alone the capital expenditure. Now there's more people, there's more risk. It's got a
yep,
larger convoy. And all this has to be balanced, and it's the challenge.
absolutely. And unfortunately, that's just sort of the nature of, as security professionals, what we get paid to evaluate. And I would say that problem still exists today. And whether you're working, as I did, in the government up
Yeah,
until, just recently, or now in the private sector, it's balancing and mitigating the risk of, we
indeed.
could move without, say, armored vehicles, but what does that entail for the occupants of the vehicle? Or you could move in a larger motorcade with armored vehicles, which is better. And this is where, and I really want to highlight this point too, is the armored vehicle program for the State Department, as with any program, I would argue, should never operate in a vacuum. The use of armored vehicles is accompanied by analytics, analysis, intelligence, as it were, whether that's, highly classified information or it's open source, that drives the decision as to whether or not an armored vehicle is the best conveyance necessary. Should we be doing this? Is an armored vehicle even needed? And if the answer is yes, then you continue to build out your security from there. But if the answer is no, then you've done your due diligence. And so it's just one tool in the tool chest, as I used to always say, but it's part of a larger decision-making process.
Absolutely. And in fact, we call it, it's the layered, the onion effect, whereby the vehicle is just one layer within the overall security umbrella. And as you say, if the decision is that an armoured vehicle is required, there are ramifications in relation to not only the drivers being trained, the occupants need to be trained. And we found this, for example, the aperture, the door opening, as we know in an armoured vehicle, the door doesn't open nearly as much as it does on a soft skin. Now, when someone walks off a plane and goes into an armoured vehicle and they've never been into an armoured vehicle, might be collected at the airport, for example, then they're not quite used to that.
No.
Which is one thing getting in, but you need to have the person trained that in case it is that you need to get out of the vehicle quickly, you need to understand that you don't have the space. And then if, again, like in Afghanistan or in Iraq, where you've got a body armour and maybe a helmet, now you've got a greater challenge. And so there's a training element, let alone the through life support. And I think in many cases, organisations miss that. They just think, well, we've got a threat. We're in a high threat environment. We'll have a civilian armoured vehicle. Yep, sure, we'll train up the driver. And away you go, tickety-boo, as they would say.
Yeah.
It's not. No, there's got to be that flow on. And again, that feedback loop, that lessons learned. Again, you can transport an occupant who's never been in an armoured vehicle, and all of a sudden there's a requirement to move quickly, and they're struggling. Now, is that lesson being learned and being pumped back into occupant training, standard operating procedures, pre-alerts and pre-training before deployment?
Yeah. And let me just, to the point of training, I spent the last 4 years overseeing the training directorate for the Diplomatic Security Service. And of course, with COVID concerns and putting people in cars and exposure for health reasons, training became a big issue as to how do you keep up with the training. And one of the most often sought after trainings that we have is our armored vehicle driver training, because it takes a little getting used to. And with that in mind, I think, having 26 years experience driving armored vehicles, I always pause before I get behind the wheel of one of them and go, okay, remember what this means. Heavier, longer stopping distances, slightly different turning opportunities. You've got to pay attention. This is a different car than what you're accustomed to. And so there definitely has to be an emphasis and a follow through on that type of comprehension of the vehicle dynamics. Without it, you'll end up having rollovers and accidents, and that's just tragic.
Indeed. And look, it's interesting. We're involved with some driver training with a number of our clients. And one of the aspects when we discuss the concept of training the drivers, let alone the occupants, which is still a foreign concept to many of the clients that we deal with, because there's a focus, I have food to deliver. Here's a vehicle, put the people in the vehicle, and away you go. Right, well, what about that whole dynamics? I haven't got time to think about it. I'm there delivering food. Okay, whatever the case. One of the aspects is that ongoing training, and it's not only training every 1 year or 2 years where there are refresher courses, but it's that ongoing when a person gets out of their own little Toyota Corolla and then they enter into the Land Cruiser 300 series that's got a GVW, gross vehicle weight, of maybe 5.6, 5.8 tons.
Yep.
They need to change the culture, the wiring of their own mindset as to how to drive. And that, as you say, that changeover, that's a great challenge. And I'm not sure that we as the industry get that right. Do you have any thoughts how that can be better managed, if you like?
Well, I'm on my third of 3 children learning to drive in the last 4 years, and just repeating that mantra of every car is different, and then watching with realization when they go from, say, a sport utility vehicle to a smaller car, and they recognize it for what it is. I mean, that, to me, that emphasized more than anything that I've done in the last, probably decade, this idea that training is continuous. It'd be great to get all armored vehicle drivers through some sort of training course through every year, but it's just not practical. And we recognize that too. But I would implore anybody, whether it's, in my current role, if I were to sit down and talk with someone about the use of an armored vehicle as part of their day-to-day security, say for a high net individual, it would have to be accompanied by an honest discussion about what training looks like, and about the need to recertify and dust off skills more often than not. And I think that the end state that at least I tried to achieve, given some constraints as a result of COVID, was to do that as often as possible. Whether I succeeded or not, I think the jury is still out on that. But maybe it's the hindsight of experience that says that none of what we do, or the vehicle itself is just a tool. The drivers, the occupants, the passengers, and how they respond to, let's say, an attack or an automobile accident, that is equally as important as the vehicle itself. And that is a realization I came to very early on. And so I can't imagine giving someone an armored vehicle and saying, right, you're great, don't worry about anything else. That would be, I think, negligent, right? Because, yeah, they're great. That vehicle's wonderful. But there's still more that can be done to inform or perhaps better predict outcomes in the event of something terrible happening. And that comes down to training. Whether it's medical training, whether it's how to egress out of the vehicle, whether it's how to drive from the right front seat, or in your case, the left front seat, and manage a situation where the driver becomes incapacitated. All of that matters as much as the vehicle does.
Indeed. And I think it's interesting you say that too, because I think there is a mindset in the industry that is still, a person behind the wheel of the vehicle, driving, accelerating, braking, cornering. Yeah, they're important. I'm not disputing that, of course. But there is a broader aspect of training, and there's a cultural aspect.
Yes.
It relates from just even pre-mission checks of the vehicle, and dealing with such a broad range of people across the world, of different cultures, of different experiences, different languages, and the ability of management to then create this culture of security and safety in relation to the vehicle, whereby it's inculcated that there is an expectation, not only a requirement, to check the vehicle before the mission, to check the vehicle after the mission. Even if you're running late, check first and then start to drive, etc. And having a safety mindset rather than just, I need to get from A to B, but there's a safety aspect. And interesting enough, we did a lot of work with the OSCE going back a few years ago, in between the two wars.
Right.
And they had an interesting challenge whereby they needed to complete a certain number of kilometres during daylight hours. Now, in summer, not a problem. Therefore, They drove slower, got terrible roads, and so the vehicles are going like this, and that's another challenge. But in the winter months, where the days are very short, they still have to cover the same number of kilometres. So therefore, the speed is higher, the roads are more icy, the roads are harder because of the ice. And when we were speaking to the training group, they acknowledge it's an issue, but there was not really the adaptation that we thought that might have been there. So it is a great challenge along the way. So,
and I would say culturally, for a lot of places, having a car accident's a big deal. So then you get very sort of timid or unsure drivers. And I used to say to, particularly in the U.S. Embassy continuum, where we have local drivers do most of the driving for us, I'd say, look, if the difference is between you and I getting back to the embassy in one piece and you dinging up a car or, pushing through something, you're going to push through.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid. Little street cred, as we call it, a little street cred on that car, you'll be fine. Because we'll make it out okay. And so these drivers would be very conscientious. Oh, I can't hit anything, or like, yeah, but this guy is trying to box you out, and it's aggressive, and it's, they're in Afghanistan. I remember at one point in time we got really jammed up, and people were getting very aggressive and kind of approaching the vehicle. And I just looked at the driver and said, "You will keep going.
Yeah,
keep going, keep going, keep going. Don't worry about scraping the vehicle. Keep going." And he was not happy, but in the end, we were okay, and the car was too.
Indeed. All right. So, with your experience in DAV and throughout, State Department, there's a challenge of being, as a program manager, if you like, being responsive to the needs not only of the capability, but the ability to deliver the vehicles and work with the armouring companies. And in fact, I was speaking with a major brake and suspension supplier this morning, and we were talking about some of the challenges that the up armourers have in getting suppliers. And when we would do pre-delivery inspections for our clients, in many a time we'll front up at the factory and we'll do the PDI. And I'll say, "Oh, but the brakes and suspension haven't changed. Why?" "Well, we haven't been supplied." "Why is that?" "Well, supply chain issues."
Yeah.
And speaking then to this particular supplier is that, yes, it's a problem, and trying to maintain that ready supply in time, given that there's a certain number of manufacturers and of components, and they're supplying numbers of sort of wholesalers and brand named organizations. So trying to stay ahead of the game, trying to manage the programming of it and working through with the up armourers, given that they have constraints, and you can beat them across the head, but it's not going to make the vehicle come off the line any quicker.
No.
So how are those challenges that you face with that? And were there any sort of tricks of the trade, if you like, that you might be able to share with us?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I thought about this for the first time in a long time. It comes down to the contract, right? So at the peak of the program for the State Department, we had a number of third-party vendors who would take these commercially available vehicles, strip them down, armor them, put them back together, and then give them back to us. And each vendor, you kind of knew what car came from what vendor based off of some of the interior treatments and so on. And one day I asked my staff, I said, why do we see a variance? How can you tell what, I think the contract should be sort of guiding uniformity so that, for example, we should be able to order replacement armored glass for, let's say, a 2013 Chevrolet Suburban and know that if the vehicle was armored by vendor A or vendor B, that one piece of glass will fit either vendor.
Oh, Dorothy,
and they're like, yeah, maybe.
It doesn't work. We'll tell a story. That's a great challenge, and one that is very relevant today.
And I was shocked that we hadn't gotten to that point yet. And so during my tenure, the armored vehicle contract came up for rebid, and we spent weekends, line by line by line, reviewing the contract to hopefully eliminate the interpretation to get us to a point where there was uniformity and standardization so that we weren't in the position of having to tie ourselves into knots to get replacements. You would think that every vendor would use the same run flat tires, and every vendor was upgrading using the same brakes or transmission, whatever the case, alternator, it doesn't matter, whatever the case may be. And in fact, they weren't. And so we really worked hard to get us to the point where we could do that. And that brings up a bigger conversation that, I have differing opinions on about, factory armored vehicles versus aftermarket armored vehicles.
Yeah.
And I think that there's an amazing story to tell with both. The amazing story with aftermarket armored vehicles, so you have a vehicle chassis, you strip it down, you armor it, you put it back together, and it goes into the field, is that, in fact, that can actually be done. The engineering behind it, the trial and error, the testament to the availability of commercially available vehicles and the limits that we push them to, and they still perform and they still succeed. That's an amazing story. And you do it in such a way as that at the time it was relatively cost effective, candidly, a lot less expensive than the factory armored vehicles, right? So those vehicles appealed to organizations like mine where you were buying in bulk, right? So you built this industry around certain vehicles and you came away with this product that was extraordinary. And then there's the factory armored vehicles that are also extraordinary, where you didn't have to worry about whether a windshield was going to fit or the run flats were different based off the vendor. And you could just call, for example, BMW and say, I have a 7 Series sedan and I need a new windshield. They'd say, right, we have it for you. Off you go. But the trade-off was the cost. And trying to rectify all of that to get to a point that made sense. And again, whether in the public sector, the government, or in the private sector, you have an obligation, whether I'm working for Kroll, where I do now, or I am working for the federal government, I have an obligation to be a good steward of money.
Yes.
And so finding that balance between the factory versus the aftermarket armoring, understanding that there's supply chain issues, there's replacement parts, and matching it all up, that would blow my mind. And I spent a lot of time figuring out ways that we could get better at it. And I think we made some improvements, not as many as I would have hoped. I think through the contracting mechanism, you have to be incredibly granular about what you're looking for and the expectations of, that fit and finish, interoperability with parts, not being stuck in a situation whereby one vendor demands one thing and another vendor demands another with respect to that. And I don't know that anyone ever imagined that would be an issue, but it was. And then the alternative being the factory armored vehicle, understanding that that's going to come at a much greater cost.
Indeed. It actually raises a very important issue that has been brought up time and again. And I was well educated by the DMO, Defence Department in Australia about this. The concept of design authority. So in the case, as you say, the third-party up armourers, they will create the armour design, they will integrate it into the vehicle, they'll take consideration of the electrics, the mobility considerations, everything about the vehicle. And as a general rule of thumb, they manage that process. And as part of that, they then will get certification, whether it's blast and ballistic protection levels through a VPAM or PAS or whatever the case may be, and then mobility, whether it's again through a PAS or a TUV, etc. And where the complication becomes is that because they are the design authority, they take full responsibility for that vehicle being fit for purpose and will be able to perform in the way that you have specified in your capability definition statement and your technical specifications. No problem. This is a wonderful thing on two fronts. One is they have the responsibility. They are the engineering experts and they are the ones who are qualified. I'm a systems engineer by trade, if you like, but I'm not a mechanical engineer. I'm not a blast engineer, and I'm not an electrical engineer. And so when I would be running a program, I would want them to maintain the risk and the responsibility so that I can do my job as a program manager, if you like. So that is terrific. Then it means that Up Armourer A will use, suspension kit A.
Yes.
Up Armourer B will say, well, no, we don't like that. We're going to use suspension and braking kit B. Terrific. They own the design. They're responsible for the design. And as such, they have chosen it.
Right.
Now, the challenge comes if I would walk in, or you in DAV would walk in and say, no, you're going to use suspension kit A.
Right.
And they'll say, not a problem. Now that's your responsibility. Should there be a road vehicle incident that is a result of mobility characteristics and the performance of the vehicle, you, me, are now responsible. Well, certainly in federal government, they're not very keen on taking responsibility for a whole lot of reasons, one of which is technical, is that we are not necessarily the technical experts. And I remember it might have been just even before, it might have been when you were running DAV, and I was at an IVSAG meeting, and I raised the question to say, look, the Land Cruiser 200 is going to come to the end of its days. There's going to be, and I said, look, let's pick 300. That much I got right. And dictate to the industry that this is the shape of the glass for a windscreen, particularly because that's the most expensive glass. And so that is the shape. And whether you bought it from an AGP or a Tyneside or a whomever, that's the shape. So therefore, if you bought a VR7 quality ballistic glass, you could put it into vehicle A or B, no matter who the Up Armourer was. And everyone sat around the table and go, that is a great idea. It's just not going to happen.
Nope.
They're not going to buy into it. And I'd spoken with a number of the manufacturers. And bottom line, and let me be maybe a wee bit undiplomatic, and one of the main reasons is because, well, my design is different. And my design, and my shape is very important, but also because when I sell you a spare part, I make the margin. I buy off the manufacturer, I sell it to you, the user, I make my margin. If you're going to the AGPs or the Tynesides of the world, you're going to cut me out, I'm not going to miss out on some money. And they make good money in through life support. And it's a crying shame.
For every engineer attached to the project, they had a differing opinion on what would work best. And then, I mean, we've only just touched on the vehicles itself, right? But then let's talk about the communications packages we were putting in cars and the expectation about all that linking into this vehicle. And I just remember struggling with, wiring harnesses and batteries and all of these things that you learned along the way that ultimately made for a better car through trial and error.
Yeah.
But not without some also resistance based off of opinions as to what would work best. And just, dare I say, fighting through that and never losing sight. And this was always very important to me, but never losing sight what the end state was, which was to get someone like you or me or an ambassador or a delegation from point A to point B and back again safely alive. And so while we could go back and forth about, what the best brakes were or alternators or designs and why the windshield needed to be slightly larger or less, or this opening needed to be cut, or how you run that wiring harness, I would often sit in rooms and go, great, appreciate everyone's input, but remember what the end state is. We have an obligation to get those occupants of that vehicle home safely. So however you get there is good, but make sure that you get there. And moreover, we have an obligation to keep these vehicles in circulation so that they can continue to do the work that they have signed up to do.
Correct.
Because there's nothing worse than showing up someplace and seeing all these deadline armored vehicles and you go, what's going on? And everyone goes, well, this one needs a windshield. This one is an old legacy diesel one that we can't get compression on and we're not sure why, but it only has, 15,000 miles on it. And you go, wait a second, what's happening here? So there's implications on the front end, the contractual compliance, and then the implication on the back end, which is how many of these vehicles are staying in circulation? Are they on the road or are they off the road? And that was always a big deal for me. And so, I think I made this point earlier about using data and analytics to decide to make the determination to use a vehicle or armored vehicle. But then there's also the data and analytics to say, hey, are we getting our return on investment?
Yeah.
Are we seeing these vehicles used as they were determined to be used? And if their use is supporting the mission set, in this case, as we're talking about diplomacy, engagement, it could be, again, high value individuals or what have you. Is it an impediment or is it facilitating the work that needs to be done? And that was always a big, theme that would run through my mind in my time with defensive equipment and armored vehicles.
Indeed. And look, it's interesting you say about data, and I think it's the poor cousin of program management by the industry. Everyone's focused about buy the vehicle. That's terrific. I'm not so sure, and I will be critical of the industry, of the major procurement agencies, particularly the non-government ones, more in the NGO market, where they will procure a vehicle, the specifications were handed down, and you'll say to them, why have you got this? And say, well, we always have. Well, you don't need it. Oh, no, I couldn't possibly withdraw because now I have to take responsibility. Well, yeah, but it doesn't work. Well, I don't want to know about it. Okay. You say, well, does the vehicle technically do what it is that it's meant to do? Will it fulfill your mission requirements? And has it got the capability? Have you defined the capability of the vehicle in relation to what you're doing? So if you're traveling in the back waters of Somalia and you've got a very heavy vehicle that might be a VR9, for example, and you're saying, well, that's terrific. What's the threat of armor-piercing ammunition in the backwaters of Somalia? And the answer might be, well, not overly great. So, well, why do you need that vehicle there? Why have you overdone?
Especially when you've spent, 3 hours of an 8-hour day stuck, having to dig out somewhere.
Correct. And you've spent another $150,000 on the capability of a vehicle that is not required. So as the custodians, as you said, of the public purse, it doesn't work. And so time and again, and carrying on from the story that you've just spoken of, is that what the industry is doing, so they're buying a vehicle and they'll put it into the field. I've done my job. They say it's up to the mission. They have to buy the spare parts. They'll have to work it out. There's some workshop down the road. Is a Toyota or it might be a sister agency. Away you go. And there is this disconnect as you go further away from headquarters into the missions and into, again, it could be a Garawe in northern Somalia or somewhere in the backwaters of Colombia, for example. And what headquarters is not seeing is that data. What is going wrong with the vehicles? Is there a systemic issue? What are the delays in getting spare parts? What is the level of operational availability of your fleet? A very simple number, a simple metrics. And I have to say, many moons ago, I was running the Land 907, I think it was, which was the Abrams tank project and program the Australian Defence Department. And I'd have to front up to the head of Land Systems Division and say, what's the operational availability of the tanks? And I go, oh, not very good or something. 20%, because we have a problem. And, and I got my butt really kicked in because, the program wasn't performing. Fair call. And so talking to procurement agencies and saying, look, the through life support is as critical, if not more. You can buy a vehicle, but if it's stuck in a workshop, it's not protecting anybody. The mission, the mission can't be accomplished. And therefore, what is the data? What are the, as you say, the metrics? And is it feeding back up into not only the through life support program, but what are the lessons learned being fed into the procurement activities, again, of spare parts, of training, of the vehicles themselves? Now, when you start mentioning lessons learned, with respect, the eyes are just going around and round, going,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I said, well, it's not
It's
good enough. And away it goes.
look at the management of an armored vehicle program is paramount to its success. It is a very nuanced program that requires really a nose to tail approach. I found my time managing the armored vehicle program was not unlike my time managing explosive canine program, where there's just a lot of sustainment, maintenance, oversight that you have to absolutely dedicate yourself to in order for it to work. And when it works, it's amazing.
Mm.
Don't get me wrong, it's amazing. But
When it
it's not.
doesn't work, it's equally as amazing, but on the other side of the coin.
It's yes. You as you said, you oftentimes have to answer for a lot because you're talking about highly specialized equipment used in some of the most difficult areas, and you for every vehicle that wasn't in circulation, there was the question of why.
Oh, yeah.
But I think when you, on the balance, when you look at some of the challenges that have been thrown our way, whether it's lead time for building the vehicles, customs and importation challenges all over the world for these vehicles, finding the vehicle that is the one size that fits all, the demands of the consumer, the person riding in the vehicle, some of the space constraints, some of the issues with run flats and lead time for replacement parts, etc. Even when you look at those challenges, overwhelmingly, I would make the case that the civilian armored vehicle programs that we have seen evolve over the last quarter century, 25 years, really sort of post 9/11, have been resoundingly successful. If you stack up the number of missions into contested or challenging areas versus the number of passengers versus the number of attacks and, heaven forbid, loss of life, overwhelmingly, without difficulty, and I don't want to jinx us, I don't want to be driven by hubris
No.
or ego. Overwhelmingly, however, our successes outweigh the failures.
Oh,
And the failures have been bad. We've lost some lives.
Mm.
And that's tragic, and it still weighs on me.
Mm.
But in the end, when those vehicles needed to perform, man, did they perform.
Indeed.
I think about Pakistan, I think about Iraq, I think about Afghanistan, I think about places in Africa. You step back and you go, wait a minute, everybody walked away from that?
Mm.
And so I not to say that we need to not keep improving, not to say that we don't need to keep looking at the cost benefit analysis of all of it and how do we get better at it. We do. That's our obligation as security professionals and practitioners. And it's something I believe strongly in, both in my previous life and even now today, doing what I do for an organization like Kroll. I cannot begin to tell you how grateful I was in my time, whether I was serving in Afghanistan or Iraq later at the tail end of my career as a wife and a mother and having young kids. Every time I'd get back to the embassy compound, I'd get out of that vehicle, I'd get my driver, get the people I was with, I would say, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to the engineers, my colleagues at Defensive Equipment and Armored Vehicles, the up-armoring companies, the real smart people looking at this problem set. Like, I made it. I had another trip. I made it back. Today was a good day.
And I think I think that is a key issue too. And one of the challenges within, certainly in the diplomatic corps, where, I was a bit different. I came out of that systems engineering and out of defence, and through the work with DFAT, particularly, is going out into the fields and going into the Islamabads and Karachis and the Baghdads and the Beiruts and the Cairos of the world, etc. And so when you go to those scary places and you're driving an armoured vehicle, there is, as you said, this appreciation that there's a lot of work that comes together in order to enable a diplomat or a humanitarian to go on a mission to deliver an outcome, not just an output. It's not just buying a ballpoint pen, but it's delivering food to the people that need it, or going to a meeting to try and massage people who are maybe getting a little bit upset with somebody else, so to speak. And there is a number of these factors that are brought together, as you say, from engineers, procurement specialists, through life support, and the back end being the up armourers, the component suppliers. Again, talking to a brake supplier today, and they said they spent over a year just designing a suspension system for a 5.5 ton vehicle. This is not just taking something from a Corolla and going, oh, yeah, that she'll be right, mate, and away you go.
Right.
Everyone involved in the industry is very serious. I think, though, that there is some improvement to be had on the program side, where the people who are sitting in head office may not have been out in the field, may not have actually driven in an armoured vehicle, and they're responsible somehow for it. And I've come across that in not too recent times. And one of the aspects in our CAV Forum that we do each year in October is a live fire event. And people say, well, why? So for the obvious reason is, if you're sitting in headquarters in wherever land, and it's a lovely office, better than mine, although I've got nice plants, is that, you need to see what happens when you shoot an API round through a piece of glass designed for a VR7. It's going to go through. A P6 glass, it's going to go through. Oh, gosh, look at that. Or, 50 grams, 100 grams of explosives attached to the door of a vehicle, the sticky bomb scenario. And so having that appreciation, understanding that if you're in the vehicle and you want to come home to your family, there's a lot more than just the lowest price vehicle, which in some cases that's where the people on the fourth floor might be saying, oh, we've got to have the lowest price vehicle because we're looking after the dollars. Yes, but there's a balance between dollars, capability, protection, and risk. And someone has to sign off on all of that. And I think both you and I have had many an argument with the budget department going, no, we're going to have to spend a little bit of money on this.
That's right. But here we sit today, being able to talk about the success of the program, because you found the balance between what would be perhaps perceived as being too expensive versus, a race to the bottom, never losing sight of what the end state is. And that is getting the occupants of that vehicle back home safely.
100%. Exactly. And
I think that's a testament to where you are today.
Well, we've made it through. And again, it's, I'll come back to that lessons learned, the data, the analytics, the logistics support, and
endeavoring to not make the same mistakes twice.
No, and we don't do it. The industry does not do it well. I think the military is generally better because there's a mindset, there's a culture of it. But when it comes to the civilian side, and particularly the non-government side, it's much more challenging. And one of the key reasons is there are very few specialists out there who are working in these programs. In many cases, where they are generalists, who one day was, the first secretary of an embassy, and now they're on rotation. Oh, well, we'll put you into managing the armoured vehicle program. Well, you're great at managing a diplomatic event, but why you qualified as forget the technical side, but being a program manager as well as being a project manager. And, we continuously harp on, certainly the CAV forums and in talking to the clients saying, look, you've got to pick up your game if you want to improve. And part of it being courtesy of the budget cutbacks that all the organisations are suffering. A vehicle now is no longer 7 years, it's 10 years or maybe 12 years. And a vehicle can go, if it's managed properly through life support, you can, and you'll end up over that life of type and that 10, 12-year life cycle. You can actually come out with a better bottom line than if you just arbitrarily replace the vehicle every 5 or 7 years.
I think we learned that lesson very succinctly in Iraq, where we were having import issues. And so the suburban fleet in particular was there and had been there for a long time. And these trucks just kept chugging along. And I was impressed. Granted, I would have loved to have had a updated fleet when I was there and as a senior regional security officer, but knowing we couldn't necessarily get to that point, the fact is we did a full court press on maintenance and keeping those existing trucks well within limits of proper usage. And that's where that adaptability, that on the ground, fix-it attitude comes into play. And to your point, as every organization, public or private, struggles with the bottom line, that creativity is going to have to play out. And I also think we have an obligation to sit down and talk to vendors and say, look, the days of 5 years are potentially over.
Oh, yeah.
So are you building this vehicle to last me 7 to 10 years? If the answer is no, then maybe the shift in conversation has to occur.
Indeed. And it feeds back into the design element too, that the design, and I remember some of the contractors that you worked with, I did as well, and knocking on the doors as I would go, in factory visits, and we would look at the design during preliminary detailed design work, and we'd look at how a particular component was fitted to the vehicle and making the comment, this is great, but I can tell you, we're going to struggle to pull that part out and then refit it when I've got a very challenging workshop that I'm dealing with in northern Kenya where the capabilities are minimal. So if you're going to make it complicated, it's terrific. Your very highly skilled local mechanic in your workshop can do this, and that's terrific. But I can tell you, Fred Bloggs, as we would call him in Australia, Fred's not going to be able to do this. And now I'm stuck over a vehicle that, I've got a part and I've got a vehicle. I just can't put them together.
Okay, put it together, which means I still don't have a vehicle.
Correct. So it's challenging the up armorers to say, your design going forward has to be smarter, has to be more creative, given, as you said, we're going from, in the early days was a 5-year life of type, to 7 to 8 years, to now 10 to 12 years. And it's possible. This is, look, I'm not the engineer, but it's not that hard. You've got to be creative and you've got to think through, as somebody who is going to struggle with this, how could you make it easier for somebody else to do so? And then everyone's life will be that much easier. All right. A couple of last few topics I'd like to raise with you. As we're going through, everyone's talking about AI, and this is well and truly the future. And so from your experience in program management and working with up armorers, working with the field and the diplomatic missions, so the changing technologies and the changing impact of AI, have you any thoughts as to how that may impact both maybe in a positive as well as maybe as a negative base to go forward in the next 5 to 10 years?
Maybe because I'm a bit older. I
don't, you're young.
Yeah,
you're younger than me.
I don't subscribe perhaps to the reliance on technology as much as maybe some of my younger contemporaries or younger colleagues would. I do see some value in AI, for example, as you revisit contracts and you're looking at standardization or normalization of certain things. Maybe AI is a good tool to help you find the things that you would miss But I don't know that AI will ever fully replace a true QA QC program in a build process in an armored vehicle, for example. I think that that's where experience and expertise are invaluable. And so I tend to have conversations about AI, and I go into it with a bit of a 50-50 outlook. I think at some point we will get to this 50-50 where, if you look at armored vehicles from start to finish, nose to tail, as I talked about earlier, everything from the, policy, the process, the procedure, the contracts, I think maybe 50% of what you do could be subject to review by AI, but 50% of what you're going to do is going to be left up to the experts with the expertise to implement. Maybe I'm naive. I'm not sure when it comes to AI, but I don't know that I'm fully committed to AI being the end all be all that some people believe that it is, especially in certain industries where quality assurance, quality control, where I have not yet seen where AI is better than, say, a human being in this instance. Over time, I'm going to reserve the right to change my opinion. But for now, I just think that, an armored vehicle program is so nuanced, so specific, that I don't know that we can get away from the human piece to it.
Yeah, it's interesting. We one of our speakers at this year's CAV Forum, Haim Dawn, is a welding inspector, and you in the program also go through a welding inspection as part of the process, and we do it for our clients. We have 3 guys on our team who are certified weld inspectors according to the American standard. And that's great. And clients will send us into the factories, and we will go through and look at every single weld, and we'll look at the construction of the vehicle. And that is terrific. I think, though, that there is a role that AI can play with that, where there are particular parameters for quality welding to a standard, and then through 3D mapping of the armour suite, the armour cocoon, if you like, within the vehicle, and then to use camera AI and go through every single weld, and using AI to be able to pick up even some of the micro changes that might be a bit difficult to the human eye, or all of a sudden you get distracted and you go past it, and maybe it is that you don't see it.
Right.
So I think there's a role for those type of things. However, from a systems perspective, again, I suppose as a systems engineer, when you stand back and look at the vehicle as a system, I think there's a considerable amount of time before AI would be able to look at the human dynamics and the, for example, the door opening, as we were talking before, and how a driver and a commander in the front seats of the vehicle are going to quickly be able to access 360 cameras or a sat phone or speakers and fire extinguisher buttons, and how all that puts together. Now, down the track, I would imagine it will, but I think there's still some long-term use of that person from that system side of things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, all right. So as a final question, we commonly ask this question, and you're as qualified to say, I don't know, as much as have an opinion is, going forward, and based upon the requirements to protect occupants going into harm's way, the limitations of the base vehicle being that it was never designed for armouring, but we do, put on 1,500, 2,000 kilos worth of armouring onto these vehicles, and trying to manage those in the field and in a variety of different environments, from very hot, in Baghdad, sitting idling in 60-degree heat. Oh my God, that's a challenge, and the Chevys, Suburbans do an amazing job. Or in the cold of eastern Ukraine, and terrible roads. So within all that in mind, if you would want to make, and maybe this is sort of wishful thinking, some changes to an up-armoured civilian vehicle, what might those be? If you could build almost the perfect vehicle, what are some of the things that you might want to consider inside that?
Well, that's a good question. I'm a pragmatic person. They're not building these vehicles for me, and they're building them for the consumer market. I just happen to take those vehicles and turn them into something that they were never intended to be. You think about that. So
Yeah.
you come up with your wish list, and ultimately that wish list ends up looking like nothing that's going to end up in the local dealership. So, I think that with a little bit of creativity, I would always argue that headroom was probably a big deal for a lot of folks. But aside from that, I just think there's an amazing story here.
Indeed.
And the story is just that. That car that the average person was driving with a little ingenuity and a lot of elbow grease was turned into something that has defined perhaps a generation of engagement, particularly for the U.S. government.
Internationally, all the NGOs, etc.
Yeah, and in such an amazing way. I mean, aside from the U.S. and Australia, UK, I mean, where else do you hear a story like that?
Mm.
Who else thinks, yeah, great, that car that's used to haul kids to soccer and to the grocery store, we're going to turn it into a massive terrorism fighting machine.
Correct.
Okay, let's give it a try. I mean, it's crazy to think about that, but that's exactly what was done. Out of necessity, of course. But the end result of which was, again, not egotistically saying this or with a lot of hubris, pretty damn good.
Indeed. I know that we've been challenging through the component suppliers, particularly glass and steel, to provide the level of protection at a thinner and or lighter weight.
Oh, and the whole conversation with ceramics and other things over the years.
Correct. So if you can bring a 5,600 kilo vehicle down to 4,600 kilos, the through life costing of a vehicle will be significantly better, as will be the operational availability when traveling on challenging times. So it's look, I think you're absolutely right, and I think on one hand the industry doesn't take enough credit, and I think sometimes the users don't put the credit into the programs who have created really quite incredible engineering product that provides a level of protection that is significant for civilians. Sure, it's not an Abrams tank. Sure, it's not. If you want to be safe, maybe stay home and just don't go out. But the world
and that's
isn't
not an option. In the worlds in which we travel, that's not an option. You're not going to say that to an ambassador. You're not going to say that to a CEO.
No.
They have a job to do. Our job is to facilitate their ability to do that job.
Correct. That's exactly right. And so whilst that's there, and that's true, there is this continuous challenge, I think, to the component suppliers to improve, to the up armorers to build smarter design vehicles, to challenge the program managers to manage the program holistically rather than I just buy a vehicle and deliver it, to challenge them from the metrics, the data, the lessons learned, because at the end of the day, it'll save time, it'll save money, it'll save lives. And, that's the business that we're in. We just have to produce an armoured vehicle in order to facilitate that.
That's right.
Indeed. Great. All right. Look, Julie, it's been marvellous speaking with you. It's been too long. And I wish you, firstly, congratulations on an incredible career at Department of State. And I want to personally thank you for all the help and support that you gave me running the program out of Canberra. You made my life very much easier. You, the people who were before you and people after you as well. And I know we've got a number of the team there from DAV coming to CAV Forum and speaking also, as you said, speaking on quality management, the quality assurance program that you guys do. So thank you personally for all the support you gave me, and I wish you nothing but great success in the position that you have there in Kroll, and also surviving the children and driver training. Mine. I'm way grown older, but it was horrendous. I had hair at the time too.
Oh, I used to have dark hair. Yes.
Indeed.
I appreciate it, Rob. I'm enormously proud of what you've done in this sphere of work, and keep up the good work. It's needed, and I look forward to continuing our conversation in any capacity going forward. You make it easy. So thank you very much.
Marvelous. Thank you so much. I wish you well.
Thank you. You take care.
Indeed.